Hello and welcome to the course of Indian History presented to you by Plus Pramesh E-Library. And here is something about me, the mentor for this course. My name is Supriya Singhal and you can follow me on Instagram by the name of Crispy Stories. So before we move forward, we have already completed ancient history and for that we actually need to applaud ourselves because we have completed a lot of portion. And now we will be starting with the medieval India. So, unlike NCRTs, where medieval and ancient history are covered in different books, in Tamil Nadu, in class 11th only, they have covered both ancient as well as medieval, and in class 12th, they have covered the modern Indian history. So, what we will do is, we've already covered ancient, so we'll finish medieval as well, which is from the Tamil Nadu class 11th book, and hence we have been starting with the unit number 7 because till unit 6 it was the ancient history, and now from unit 7 till I think unit 10 it will be basically medieval India. So before, like, without wasting any time, we should just start with the lesson number 15, which is about the early medieval India. Okay, so now before we move forward, just give me one thing. In North India, which was the last empire that we studied, it was Harsha's empire, correct? In the South India, which was the last empire that we studied, here it was Rashtrakutas, and in the South it was Imperial Cholas, correct? So these are the last 2-3 things that we have studied from the ancient Indian part. Now we will continue from here and understand that what happened in medieval India. So what happened was that after the death of Harsha, there was no political unity in India. As in, you cannot say that there was one empire that ruled like entire India, just like that happened in the time of Mauryas or Guptas. So you can say what was happening was, see, earlier when if you see Guptas and Mauryas, the whole empire, like the whole India. So if this is India, okay, so what was happening, that major part, like this whole part till this part, so this part would have been coming under some like one great empire. Similarly, during Harsha also you will realize that this till Narmada, okay, this part was actually under him only. That means still a great portion of India coming under one empire. But after Harsha, you will find that there was no one great empire that could rule over large part. Thus, you will find that lot of small dynasties, small you can princely states existed. Okay, for example, you will find that country was split up into large number of states, and these states, see, what is happening is every state is wanting to expand. Every state is wanting to get more territory within itself. Okay, and for that, what they will have to do, they will have to ultimately fight with the other states. For example, there is one state and here there is another state. Now if it also wants to expand and this state also wants to expand, so obviously what will happen, they will have to fight with each other, and hence you will find that they were constantly fighting with each other, and because they were changing their frontiers. The important kingdoms which then existed, like after the death of Harsha, which existed, were probably Kashmir. So we'll start marking them in the map so that you remember them. Okay, so here, so there will be Kashmir, the kingdom of Kashmir, then kingdom of Gandhara, then kingdom of Sindh here, then kingdom of Gujarat, kingdom of Kannauj would be somewhere here, then kingdom of Ajmer somewhere here, kingdom of Malwa is here, then kingdom of Bengal, and then kingdom of Assam. So you can see that so many kingdoms have started coming, when earlier this whole thing might have been under Harshas or Guptas or Mauryas. Okay, so now you will find that in early 8th century, Kashmir was very dominant, and then you will also realize, see, before we move forward, I think this was a doubt asked in one of the videos, that ma'am, what is the if what is the meaning of this 8th century? See, the point is, if I say that today is what we are living in 2020, okay, but we say that we are living in 21st century, and this is your reference, that century is always century is always ahead of the year that you are in. So if you're talking about 8th century, you're talking about 700 AD. Okay, so if I tell you that industrial revolution took place in 18th century, then you're talking about 1700s. Okay, 1700s to 1700 and basically 1800. So this will become your 18th century. Okay, so 1 century ahead. Understood? So 21st century is actually 2020. That means you are still in 20th like year, but you are calling it as 21st century. So now just never get confused. Okay, so you will find that in 8th century or basically in 700s, you will find that Kashmir was dominant, and in the Bengal area you will find that there was a dynasty by the name of Palas, okay, which ruled till the Gujarat Pratiharas became the most powerful kingdom in the North India. Okay, But you also know that here in so this is happening in North India, but we have already studied in the South India that around 1000 AD there was Rashtrakutas here, and there was imperial Cholas in the south. Okay, so this is like a revision of what we have done. Now we will start studying about each of these kingdoms in detail. Okay, not each of these kingdom, actually we'll study about Rajputs, because there was many Rajput dynasties like of Mewar, Marwad, as I told you. Then they will be of Ajmer, then there will be Bikaner. So there will be so many Rajput dynasties existing. Hence, what we'll do, we'll study about Rajputs, and then we will switch on to basically Arab conquest in India. Okay, so you will understand that Rajput kingdoms. Okay, like who are these Rajputs, and where did these Rajput kingdoms like existed. So the dominance of Rajputs, began from the 7th and 8th centuries. Matlab somewhere around 600 to 700 their dominance started, their dominance actually started, and it lasted. See, Rajputs became a prominent force in India until the empire was actually captured by Delhi Sultanates and Mughal empires. And then also, if you know that, you might have heard of battles of Khanwa by Babur, with Rana Sanga. Then similarly, battle of Haldigati with Maharana Pratap. So you still know that, even when the Mughal came, Rajputs were still very strong and they held their empire very well. Okay, so that is what I'm saying, that Rajputs, okay, they were many in number. First of all, like there was not just one Rajput kingdom, there were many Rajput kingdoms. And secondly, their rule started somewhere around 600 to 700 AD, but you can say their peak of the empire lasted till the Muslims or Arabs invaded in India. Okay, in around, you can say, 1100 AD, because before that, after that, you will find a lot of these kingdoms, they actually accepted the sovereignty of Delhi Sultanate and Mughal Empire, but who didn't accept, they actually fought the wars with them. Okay, even after that, you will find that many Rajput states, they continued to survive, that I told you, for a long time, even during the Akbar's empire. And in the period of Muslim aggression, you will find that Rajputs were the main defenders of Hindu religion. So whenever there was a conquest from the Muslim side or Arab side, okay, and when they are wanting to destroy their temples, etc., you will find that Rajputs are actually a furious force who are protecting them. Then there are several theories about the origin of Rajputs, and this is important because you will find that there are many theories, as in some are saying that Rajputs actually came from the Afghanistan area. Some were saying no, they were born out of a yagna or a havan, okay, that was done. And then some are saying that these used to be a tribe, and then they like settled in different parts and acquired different names. So just like you remember, we had an Aryan invasion theory, and we still don't know where are Aryans from. Similarly, there have been many theories about Rajputs where we are not sure about where are these Rajputs originally coming from. Okay, they were considered. So here are few theories. So they are considered as descendants of the foreign invaders, as I told you, and they might have been considered as Indian Kshatriyas also, because these are just theories. See, theories exist because either they don't have evidence, or either all the theories have 1 1 1 1 2 2 2 evidences, but no theory is prominently saying that I am the reason, because it can be contradicted. So hence, till the time it is not established in history, we will also write just that Rajput had many origin theories. The foreign invaders were Indianized and then absorbed into Indian society, and many legends of Rajputs, they support this theory. So that is why we are saying that this might be the case, that they came from outside. Okay, then they actually stayed in India for so long that they got Indianized, and finally they basically accepted India as their own home, and they got acquired in the society. Okay, and that is why we can say that Rajputs are so diverse, because they're already coming from other regions, then they settled in the regions, different regions, and then they acquired their taste. And that is why basically they have a lot of diversity within the Rajput clan also. Okay, they became homogeneous only by the constant intermarriages that were taking place between the Rajputs, and they also try to adopt common customs so that they can come as one powerful force. Okay, they made war their chief occupation. So you must have heard, right? Rajputs, Kshatriya, and as in, like, these were the people who used to constantly wage wars, and they were very brave and courageous because they never got afraid of fighting. Okay, however, you will also find that trade and agriculture were also prosperous in these regions, and the Arab travelers, like, who came to India during this time, they used to refer to the prosperity of these Rajput kingdoms, and how they also used to have great cities, like magnanimous cities. For example, if you know that Jaipur was established by Savai Jai Singh. Okay, So he's also a Rajput. So you will find that Jaipur has been described in many of these old texts as a very magnanimous city where it's a grid pattern, and the king has actually divided it so beautifully that it has administrative setup also, and it has basically you can call the living spaces for normal people also, like the common man. Okay, and they built strong forts also. So because they used to wage so much wars that they needed basically some kind of protection to live, that is why you will find that Rajasthan is also called as the place of forts or the abode of forts, because there are so many forts here, and specifically like all the palaces you will find majorly they're either hill forts, they're either forest forts, or they are basically jal forts. Jal forts as in surrounded by water from all the sides. So that's this will what will happen, that even if there is an enemy attack, enemy won't be able to actually enter these forts. Okay. The Gurjar Pratiharas, these were one of the earliest Rajput rulers, and in the the first ruler that we know, and we actually use him this ruler's name a lot, is basically Harishchandra. We say na, why you are being Harishchandra by saying always the truth. So Harishchandra has become a Takya Kalam also now, and he conquered the extensive territory from in Rajputana, within Rajputana only, and he basically ruled with his capital at Bhinmal. The Gurjars, they were basically in different branches. So these Gurjar Pratiharas are not having like one branch, they are having many branches. Okay, and their one branch used to rule in Gujarat, and then there was another branch that used to rule in Avanti. Okay, the Pratiharas, they got involved in three cornered contest with see. First of all, we have studied that Rajputanas are a different kingdoms. Okay, they have different rulers. Then we studied about Raja Harishchandra, and then we studied how basically Gurjar Pratihara is not just one kingdom, but it is ruling in different parts with different you can say branches. Okay, and now remember I told you this about this tripartite struggle in my wall chart course. So what is happening is that Gurjar Pratiharas are involved in a tripartite struggle. Okay, with Rashtrakutas and with Palas, because they all want basically hold over one place which is called as Kannauj. Okay, so they all want the hold over this Kannauj, and that is why Gurjar Pratiharas, Palas of Bengal, and Rashtrakutas of Deccan, they are fighting with each other to actually see that who finally occupies this Kannauj. Okay, then you will find that Pratiharas in the later time, after the Arab conquest, they became weak. The Chauhans, okay, of one of the rulers that we know also is Prithviraj Chauhan. They were the most valiant of Rajput rulers, and they basically were present in Ajmer. Okay, these are also called as Kachhawa Rajputs, because these were the one who were ruling in Ajmer. Okay, the Vigraha Raj, he was the most important king who occupied Delhi, and therefore you will find that Chauhans faced onslaught of Arabs, because what was happening. See, when Arabs came from the northwestern side. Okay, so suppose let's just draw India. Okay, now tell me, how many options do you have to enter India? Okay, either you can enter from here or you can enter from this side. Now we know that sea trade only few people knew. Okay, that is why the entrance from sea is little less possibility. But northwestern you have a land frontier, and here is the this is the place actually from where even Arab conquest happened in India. Okay, and what is happening was these Rajput kingdoms were present in this northwestern region. Okay, and this northwestern region, plus they were also present in Delhi, and Delhi was considered as the central to the ruling of India, and that is why you will find that many of the Chauhans, since Chauhans were the one who were present in Delhi, you will find they faced a lot of onslaught of these Muslim or the Arab invasions. Okay, and Ghazni, Gori, they all invaded India, and Rajputs were the one who valiantly fought them also. The Parmars were also important Rajput rulers of this time, and the most important king of Parmar was King Raja Bhoj. Okay, we must have studied a lot of stories also about him, and then his military conquest as well as cultural contributions also remain notable in the history of Rajputs. Okay. Now this constant fighting which is happening between the Rajputs is actually nothing but weakening them themselves only. So if you remember about Marathas, where we studied in the wall chart course, I told you that Marathas were a confederacy of 5 different you can say families, and since they were constantly fighting with each other, it became easier for the enemy to come and rule over them. So similar was the case with Rajputs, where no Rajput wanted to accept the sovereignty of another Rajput. Okay, even suppose there are 7 kingdoms in Rajput suppose, and there is one kingdom which is very big and very, very powerful, these smaller kingdoms will not accept the sovereignty of this big kingdom. And that is why what will happen, it will become easier for the enemy to come and actually invade India. Okay, and the point is कि sometimes these Rajputs, because they wanted to acquire more empire, and suppose if they are present here and there's another one present here, these three will actually go and ask the help from these Arab invasions, and then they will try to defeat this bigger player. That means what? These four Rajput dynasties like these, they do not even have a common enemy. Okay, and that is the problem, because if you don't have a common enemy, you will not get united. You will not get united, you will not fight together. You will not fight together, you will make it easier for your enemy to come and invade. You will make it easier for your enemy to come and invade. He will one day actually wipe you out only. Okay, the lack of political foresight and constant rivalries obviously prevented any opposition to the Muslim invaders, and it became easy for the Muslim invaders to come and invade India. Now we will actually start with the first topic of medieval India, which is basically Arab conquest of Sindh. Okay, so we are talking about how Arabs basically came to Sindh and how they basically conquested that region. So the religion Islam, it was born in Mecca, that we already know, and it was around the same time, around 700 AD. Religion was born in Mecca, and then Prophet took and who was the one? Basically, its founder was Prophet Muhammad, and he took you can say a journey from Mecca to Medina, and that is why today also Mecca and Medina are the holy places for Islam. Okay, and his teachings, the founders' teachings, they were basically, they made the wealthy people of Mecca his enemy, because he used to say that you should distribute whatever you have, you should give alms, etc. And that is why you will find that a lot of wealthy people in this region did not like him, and therefore from Mecca to Medina he had to actually migrate. Okay, it was not like by will, but it was by force, and which was the starting point of the Muslim calendar and the Muslim era called Hijra. If you know that Muslim calendar is a lunar calendar, okay, and we say that when will Ramzan start, when will they have to open the roza, they're all dependent on basically moon's movement. Okay, and lunar calendar is different from the Gregorian calendar, which we use like January, February 1, because it has 12 months, but I think lunar calendar has only 9 or 10 months. Okay, so that is why I'm saying that the calendar that Muslim people are using is a different calendar, and the dates and everything are dependent on the movement of sun. Now, after 8 years, you will find that he returned to Mecca again. The Prophet returns to Mecca again from Medina with his followers, but he died in 632 AD. Now, these followers of Muhammad, they set up an empire called as the Caliphate. And this Caliphate word, if you know that it will come again and again, specifically when we will be dealing with the non-cooperation movement also, and Khilafat movement, okay, in modern Indian history. So now you will find that Umayyads and the Abbasid, they were also called as the caliphs, and they expanded their rule by the conquest, and they spread the religion. Because see, Arab is a new religion, or Islam is a new religion which has started around 700 AD, and now obviously see, Prophet migrated and then came back, he got like lot of followers, and these followers are the one which will now spread it to different people. But see, if you want to spread it, you cannot only remain in one region, because one day if suppose anything happens, then this region chances of getting wiped out are high, because we are concentrated in just one region. So what even the people wanted of this religion was that it should reach like maximum people as it can, and that is why they spread their religion. And see, whenever suppose there is an Arab ruler or a Muslim ruler, if he is going to conquest, or if he is going to achieve basically an upper hand over another kingdom, he's obviously gonna spread his religion. So in 712 AD, Muhammad bin Qasim, he invaded Sindh. Okay, there is a misconception in people that Mahmud Ghazni was the first one of the Arabs who actually invaded India. Answer is wrong. It was basically Muhammad bin Qasim who invaded Sindh region. Okay, and he was his commander of this Umayyad kingdom, and then Qasim also defeated Dahir, the ruler of Sindh, and he killed him in a well contested battle. And you will find that his capital Aror was also captured. So here what Muhammad bin Qasim has done is that he came to India, he took basically fought a battle with the ruler of Sindh, he also acquired his capital, he defeated him badly, okay, and he killed him in the battle. Now Qasim extended his conquest further into Multan area. Okay, it's the same Muhammad bin Qasim, and he also organized the administration of Sindh. The people of Sindh, they were given the status of zimmis or protected subjects, and this is important. See, he is trying to actually expand the empire. He's spreading around the idea of Muslim and Arabs, but what he's doing is that his administration, obviously now Sindh is under him, so you will find that Sindh people are also happy with the rule, and they used to call him Muhammad bin Qasim as the protector of subjects. Okay, and there was no interference. See, Muhammad bin Qasim invaded Sindh, but he did not want to interfere in the people's lives. So, what is happening is that people are also happy that he is not interfering in their lives, and that is why they are also giving him a good name. And now you will find that he is not interfering in people's life and not even the property he is taking, and soon you will find that Qasim was again recalled by Caliph. However, see, Qasim is just one of the persons who has been, like you can say, ordered to actually spread around Islam and capture more territory. So he has done so. Now he has been called back. Now, however, but what is happening that Sindh is still under the Arabs, but the Muslims, they could not expand their authority further in India because of the presence of powerful Rajput kingdoms, especially in the northwestern region. So they had a lot of difficulty that going from Sindh to India. Okay, Sindh is just like this, with like Gujarat as a border. Still, they can't actually enter India because of the presence of Pratiharas. Okay, and although the conquest, they see Sindh. Why did Muhammad bin Qasim actually came to Sindh? Because he knew that if he has to enter India, he needs to acquire the territories outside it, and slowly he'll enter India. But what he didn't know was that India's northwestern frontier was protected by these brave, valiant Rajput kingdoms who would give their lives but not give their motherland. Okay, and also see what is happening now. The Sindh is conquested, but you cannot go for any more conquest immediately, and it has resulted in the diffusion of the Indian culture abroad. Because now what is happening, Qasim's forces are basically standing here and they are also interacting with Indians, and this is the time you will find that Indian mathematicians, okay, have written a lot of work. Arab mathematicians are also there and they're finding this work, and this is how you will find that Indian mathematics went outside to Arab world, and then Arabs were the one finally who actually wrote about it, and they got the name also. Okay, there are a lot of things that Indians invented much before than Arabs, but Indians never got the credit for it because it was actually, what you can say, the written evidences have been found by Arabs. Okay, the Indian numerals in the Arabic form also, they went to Europe through Arabs only, and since Sindh was a part of Arab Empire, you will find that the inflow of Indian knowledge was great, because Sindh was earlier the part of India only. So whatever, if you see that Indian kingdom had the knowledge, etc., it also went to Sindh region where Arabs were ruling. Then it went to Arabs, and Arabs basically spread it to other parts of the world, for example Europe. Now we have studied about Muhammad bin Qasim. So what we have studied about how Islam came around. Then we have studied about the first one, Muhammad bin Qasim, and now we will take basically Mahmud of Ghazni. Okay, so Mahmud of Ghazni, and we will talk about his invasions also. So you will find that Muhammad bin Qasim is coming around 600 to 700 AD. Okay, 700 AD is this one, so he's coming around 700 to 800 AD. And this Mahmud of Ghazni, he's actually coming around 800 to 900 AD. Okay, and this you will find that this Mahmud of Ghazni used to belong to this Abbasid Caliphate, which declined by the end of this 9th century. Okay, the Turkish governors, you will find they established independent kingdom. That's what happened in India also. After one great dynasty is over, their fiduciaries become stronger. Similarly, even in the Abbasid, that was happening, that Abbasid Caliphate was a big empire, and it finally, when it was getting weak, the Samantas or the fiduciaries or the smaller, you can say, governors, they became very strong, and they started establishing their small independent kingdoms. And Caliph, you will find that he only remained a ritual authority now. And one among these governors was this Alptigin, whose capital was Ghazni. And his successor and son-in-law, Sabdukin, he wanted to conquer India from the northwest, and he succeeded in capturing Peshawar from Jaipal, but his raids did not produce a lasting effect, and he was succeeded by his son Mahmud. Now, before we go forward, this was just a small story about Mahmud of Ghazni. Okay, because Mahmud of Ghazni, you should understand that how he was not the only one to have a longing for actually capturing India. His father was also the one who wanted to do that. Now we will study about Mahmud of Ghazni. So Mahmud of Ghazni, I have said here basically 800 to 900, it is around 900 to 1100. Okay, so because his father is also there, right? So Mahmud of Ghazni is 900 to 1080. So Mahmud is said to have made 17 raids in India, and this was a question asked in one of the from the state services examination. At that time, you will find, see, if somebody is able to invade India not once, not twice, but 17 times, then that means he's coming, he's looting, and he's going back. And this he did 17 times. What does it tell you about my state or my empire where some invasion is happening? That my empire is weak, that I don't have a polite, like a united front against the enemy. And why is it? Because North India was that time divided into number of Hindu states. Okay, there were many states and they were not united. They didn't even have a powerful army, and what they did was they actually conspired against each other, because of which Mahmud of Ghazni was able to actually attack India 17 times. Okay, then you will find that on the frontier of India there existed Hindu Shahi kingdom. Okay, from Punjab to Kabul. So somewhere from Punjab to Kabul till here you will have a Hindu Shahi kingdom. Okay, and the other kingdoms will be the kingdoms of Kannauj, the kingdom of Gujarat, then Kashmir, then Nepal, then Malwa, then Bundelkhand, and these are only the few that I am telling you. Now in this you add the Rajput kingdoms. You will find that there are almost more than 100 kingdoms existing in the northwestern region itself. The initial raids were against the Hindu Shahi kingdom, okay, in which its king Jaipal, he was defeated in 1001 AD, and after his defeat, you will find that Jaipal emulated himself because he thought that his defeat was disgrace. It was very, see, for a king, there is not much. There is a very shame. It's a shameful event that if he loses a war, because if he loses the war, his janta, his praja, or what you can say, the people in his kingdom, they also feel very disheartened. Okay, and you will find that his successor, Jaipal's successors, Anandpal, he also fought against Mahmud, but again he was defeated in the Battle of Vaihin. And you will find that finally what is happening, that this Mahmud is actually capturing this area, Hindu Shahi area, and its capital also, which was near Peshawar. And in this battle only, you will find that Anandpal was supported by another Hindu rulers. Okay, and now why other rulers have come into picture? Because they know that the enemy is strong. This particular person, okay, or Anandpal won't be able to fight alone. And if you don't support him now, the outsider will actually come and invade their kingdoms too. So now you will find that in this battle of Vaihind, Anandpal is supported by rulers of Kannauj and as well as Rajasthan. Okay, but still also you will find that Mahmud won in this battle, and he then extended his rule basically came inside India. Now the subsequent raids of Mahmud into India, they were, see, Mahmud first time when he came, he wanted to actually acquire some territories, but the next time he came, he realized that acquiring territories is a lot of effort. So what he did was, he came to India, he looted whatever he can, the money that he wanted, okay, from the rich temples, monasteries, whatever there existed, he looted them, and then he went back again and he plundered the rich cities. Okay, so in 1011 AD you will find that he raided Nagarkot in Punjab hills and Thaneswar near Delhi. It's the same Thaneswar, basically, remember, which is related to Harsha. Then in 1018 Mahmud also plundered the city of Mathura. Okay, why? Because Mathura had a lot of temples, Krishna Bhakti, and they also attacked Kannauj. The ruler of Kannauj, then Rajapal, he abandoned Kannauj and he later died. Then Mahmud returned via Kalinjar, okay, with fabulous riches, and then you will find that his next important raid was Gujarat. So what is Mahmud doing? He's actually, see, he came to India, he basically conquered the territories outside. He realized that India is very, very rich, and how can I get the share of this enormous wealth? By looting and plundering the rich cities, the temples, etc. And that is why he kept on doing this for 17 times. Okay, 17 times he came to India, and 17 times he did it. And he did not only concentrate in one empire, like he went north Kashmir also, he went east also, then he went south also, and he went to Gujarat also, where he looted this famous Somnath temple. Okay, so you will find that in 1024, Mahmud marched from Multan across Rajputana, and he defeated the Solanki king Bhimadev I, and he plundered this Ahinwad and sacked the famous temple of Somnath, because in Gujarat you will find there was a rule of Solankis. And then finally he returned through the Sindh desert back to where he came from. And this Somnath temple one was the last raid or last campaign of Ghazni in India, and after which Mahmud Ghazni died in 1030 AD. Now Mahmud, you will find that he was not just a plunderer or a raider of wealth, okay, but he also wanted to build a large empire, but he was able to build it only, like outside India. He did not enter India, but it does not mean that he was a small ruler. His empire went from Caspian Sea till Punjab, and then Gujarat to Samarkand. So you will find that Samarkand is basically Uzbekistan. So you will find that so much vastness his empire already has, but he was not able to. He did not want to actually rule in India. It was a lot of effort, and so many kingdoms were there. So he thought it's better that I come here, loot all the wealth, and go away. Then Ghaznavid Empire, it roughly included Persia also, it included Afghanistan also, and it included today's Pakistan also. Oh, sorry, Punjab, the Punjab of Pakistan. Okay, his achievements were due to his leadership and obviously his restless activities, and he was considered a hero by Islam, of Islam by medieval historians. Okay, why? Because he looted, etc. is fine, but he also used to patronize art and literature. Okay, he remember. I'll tell you two poets. You will find that two people who came along with Mahmud Ghazni, which are basically, we can say, important writers. So Firdausi, okay, he was a poet laureate in the court of Mahmud, and he is the one who is the author of Shahnama. Please do not forget it. If you want to write, if you want me to write, I'll write it here. It's Firdausi. Okay, and what did he write? He write Shahnama. Please don't forget it. This has been asked in numerous examinations before. Then there is Al-Biruni. Okay, these two names you need to remember. And Al-Biruni, you will find that he was also in Muhammad's court, and he wrote his famous book which is called as Kitab-e-Hind. Okay, wherein he is trying to give an account of India, what he saw, and how basically how were the kingdoms that he saw. And his conquest of Punjab and Multan ultimately changed the political situation in India. Why? Because he paved the way for Turks and Afghanistan also to come and conquest India, and show that how northwestern frontier of India is divided, and it's easy right now to attack India. He drained the resources of India by his raids and his plunders, okay, and he deprived India of their manpower. The exhaustion of the India's economic resources, human resources, they had a very large impact on the political, you can say, future of India. Because now what was happening, it was clear that since India is disunited and it is not even ready with the new technologies to fight these foreign invaders, yeah, it was very obvious that Mahmud is just the one. But after him, whoever will come, he will be able to actually attack India, attack India and capture some part of India easily. Okay, the Hindu Shahi kingdom was obviously the one which was guarding these northwestern frontiers, but after it fell into Mahmud's place, there was no saving of India. Okay, and you will also find that the Punjab, which was just at the boundary of India, it was, you can say, the last safety pin which was there, but it was also gone after a point of time. Now, what we have studied is, we have studied the how the Muslim religion of Muslims or Islam came around. Then we studied about Muhammad bin Qasim. Then we went on to study about Mahmud of Ghazni, and now we will start with Muhammad Ghori. Okay, so Muhammad Ghori, you will find that Ghoris, these are basically the vassals of Ghazni, but they became independent after Mahmud's death. Obviously, they were also like one of the fiduciaries, but after their king died, so they also declared independence. Now, taking advantage of the decline of Ghaznavid Empire, this Muizzuddin Muhammad, who is also known as Muhammad Ghori, he actually, thought that why can't I bring the Ghazni's empire under his control? And you will find that he started making his position strong. He wanted to secure his position, and that is why you will find that Muhammad Ghori wanted to turn to India, because he thought that it's better that if I go to that place where Mahmud of Ghazni could raid 17 times and still get a lot of plunder, so why can't I? So, and look, unlike Mahmud of Ghazni, you will find that, like say Mahmud of Ghazni, I told you, he came till northwest, he conquered till there, but after that in India he didn't conquer anything. In India he used to come, raid and go back. But that was Mahmud of Ghazni. But Muhammad Ghori is actually not the one like Mahmud Ghazni. He, unlike the earlier Ghazni, he wants to establish a proper entire empire in India. He wants to conquer India. He wants to rule India. He doesn't want to only plunder India. Okay, so that is why you will find that 1175 AD, Muhammad Ghori, he captured Multan, and he occupied the whole of Sindh area, which is nearby Gujarat and Rajasthan area. And in 1186 he attacked the Punjab. Okay, and he captured it also from Khusru Malik, and he annexed that Punjab into his territory. So now what he's doing, he's annexing each territory and putting him under his empire. The annexation of Punjab was carried, and he kept basically making conquest till Satluj river, and that is why you will find that he actually came in direct contact with Chauhans, like direct conflict with Chauhans. Now there was the Battle of Tarayan. So there are actually two battles of Tarayan, 1191 AD and 1192 AD, and they both are fought between Muhammad Ghori and versus Prithviraj Chauhan. So what was happening was, see, in Hindu princes till now they have realized that first of all Ghazni comes, he loots their temples, he loots their cities and goes away. Okay, but they can't do anything about it because he's not wanting to capture India and conquer India and rule over India. He's just wanting to take the enormous wealth share. Now came the Gori, and Gori has a very different intention. He wants to conquer, he wants to establish his empire and sit here only. So that is why Hindu rulers have started panicking now. So the Hindu princes of North India, they formed a confederacy, and under whom they formed a confederacy. Confederacy means that lot of these princely states of northwestern India, they came together and they elected like one of the person as their head, which is Prithviraj Chauhan. Okay, and they decided that they have to defeat the Muhammad Ghori, who is wanting to invade or capture India. So that is why you will find that there happens the first battle of Tarayan in near Delhi in 1191 AD, and who basically fought Prithviraj Chauhan with other important rulers. He fought against Ghori, and in this war you will find that Prithviraj Chauhan has won the war. Okay, and Muhammad Ghori, who wanted to conquer India, he felt very humiliated. He thought that, I was thinking of acquiring India, and how come suddenly one of these rulers just come and defeats me? So he decides to take the revenge of this defeat, and he basically starts preparing for another war, which Prithviraj Chauhan is not aware about. Okay, and you will find that eventually in just 1 year, Ghori is able to actually gather an army of almost 1,20,000 people. Okay, and he, along with this large force, he actually enters Lahore via Peshawar, and then he sends a message to Prithviraj again, asking him to, saying that you should accept my sovereignty and you should become a Muslim. And Prithviraj is a die-hard Hindu. Okay, he rejected this proposal and he said, okay, fine, you've already lost one war, so let us meet again and you will lose another war also. So he also gathered a large force consisting of 3 lakh horses, 3,000 elephants, etc., and foot soldiers. Okay, and now you will find that many Hindu Rajas who are very terrified of Muhammad Ghori coming and ruling over them, then converting them to Islam or Muslim, they also basically joined Prithviraj Chauhan in this war. And this became the second battle of Tarayan in 1192 AD. But you will find destiny did not help Prithviraj Chauhan, because in this war it was Muhammad Ghori who won over Prithviraj, and finally Prithviraj was captured and he was killed also, because Muhammad Ghori did not want to take chance of having another war with Prithviraj Chauhan and losing to him. Okay, and the second battle of Tarayan was very you can say very harsh battle from both the sides, but it was also a decisive battle, because it was going to decide whether Islamic invaders could actually enter India and establish their rule in India. And it also decided that how Rajputs were basically not a strong enough force to meet any sort of disturbances. Their political prestige of Rajputs also suffered a serious setback. The whole Chauhan kingdom was now at the feet of the invader, and the first Muslim kingdom was thus formally established in India at Ajmer. Now see, Ajmer used to be the Gad, okay, what we say, like the point of Hindu rule. Okay, and now for a brief amount of time, because Prithviraj Chauhan of Ajmer has been defeated, this particular place is under Muslim control. Okay, after the brilliant victory over the Prithviraj at Tarayan, the Ghori, he wanted to return to Ghazni, okay, leaving behind his whole empire. Okay, to whom? To his general Qutbuddin Aibak. Okay, and this is important. See, even though Ghori came to India, he captured India because he wanted to do so. He also wanted to loot India, which he did. And then, after that he realized that he doesn't want to live in this empire where people are not actually, people are not following Islam or his religion, etc. So he actually went back and he gave this entire empire to his general, okay, like of the army, whose name was Qutbuddin Aibak. Okay, and he basically told Qutbuddin Aibak that you can actually make conquest and you can expand the reach of empire. Aibak consolidated his position first, because otherwise nobody will obey him, and then he basically occupied places like Delhi and Meerut. And in 1193 you will find that he prepared for another invasion by Muhammad Ghori, and this invasion that Ghori was wanting to take was against this Gadwala ruler Jai Chandra. Okay, and you know there's one story about this Jai Chandra, that in the Battle of Tarayan, it was the Jai Chandra who actually thought that his daughter has eloped with Prithviraj Chauhan, so he sort of helped Muhammad Gori to defeat Prithviraj Chauhan. But after that, he only had differences with the Muhammad Gori, and you will find that after that Muhammad Gori actually goes on a war with him, Jai Chandra, and he defeats Jai Chandra also. Okay, so you will find that Muhammad, he routed Jai Chandra's forces, that he defeated Jai Chandra's forces, and Kannauj was occupied by Muslims again after the Battle of Chandavar. So it was the Battle of Chandavar where Jai Chandra was defeated by Muhammad Gori. Okay, and the battles of Tarayan and Chandavar are now two important battles that have given major setback to Rajputs because they have lost their territories, they have lost their prestige, they have lost their empire. And secondly, you will find that it has also led inroads for Islam rule in India. Okay, or the Turkish rule of India. So now, the one question that you should be getting in your mind is that why these Hindu rulers have become so weak that, none of them, like Ghazni came, Ghori came, and then, Aibak is there. How are they not able to defeat such, not even one of these Muslim rulers? So now we will study about the causes of failure of Hindu kingdoms. So you will find that the causes of downfall, they are very clear even historically also. The most important cause was the lack of unity, because see, if one is that a whole empire is under Akbar or Ashoka, then what is happening, that they are following the orders of Ashoka, and Ashoka is making sure that there are no lapses. But now what is happening is, this is the empire, there is one state here, one state here, one state here. These are like unruled areas, or these are the areas that these two are fighting. So already they are fighting with each other, then there is third enemy, so it becomes easy for him now to actually put one against the other and still get the empire. Okay, so that is why I'm saying that they lacked unity. They were divided in factions, and the Rajput princes, they exhausted one another only. They used to fight so much with one another that they were exhausted by fighting with one another, that they did not have the capacity and energy to fight with the outsiders. Okay, then you will find that many Hindu states, they were also not very powerful states. Okay, they were declining in power. The military methods, their technologies, artilleries, they were also very, very old. They did not have new technologies to fight. Indians still continued to rely on elephants, while Muslims started having fast moving cavalry. So elephants are heavy. Okay, it takes time for elephants to move in the battlefield, but imagine, instead of elephant you have horse. So in a chess, right, so you have an elephant who can move either straight, but there's a horse which can move, which can jump high places, right? So that is what is happening. They are having fast forces, you are having smaller ones, and it's become difficult to fight the war. Now Muslim soldiers are also better organized, and they have basically able leaders also. Their religious zeal, because they know that they have to spread Islam. In Hinduism, or in the India, you will find that the Hindu rulers do not have a zeal to spread Hinduism, because they believe that the entire country is Hindu. Okay, but for Muslims, when their religion has just been newly established, the zeal of spreading their religion is much, much higher. Okay, and among the Hindu, you will find the duty of fighting was only confined to a particular class called Kshatriyas. Okay, Shudras were not fighting, Vaishyas were not fighting. Who were fighting? Kshatriyas. Okay, and you will find that in here Muslims that's not the case. I mean, the whole there all the people are fighting. Moreover, in Hindus you will find they were always on a defensive mode. Like Hindus will never give first attack. They will always wait for an attack to happen, and then they will give the second attack. So they are not offensive. They are always defensive, and that is why you will find that it is a weak position. Why? Because you're waiting till the other person is attacking, and once they attack, obviously they're gonna attack, they're gonna harm your territory, they're gonna harm your people, and they're gonna harm your artillery and your army men also. After that, if instead you would have attacked first, you would have had like 1 lakh army, cavalry, etc., and lot of things. But now the inspiration, the motivation, the aspirations in your army is also less. Okay, then secondly, you have lost lot of your army men, and thirdly, what is happening, they've already captured certain parts, so now you're not fighting to extend your empire, you're fighting to save it. And that is why it is always said that defensive position is a weak position. And this is a very famous quote in international relations also, and this is a very famous quote used in context of India-Pakistan relations also. So with this, we finish this particular chapter, and in the next class we will start with another chapter. I hope you're liking the chapters. Thank you.